Cyclones.
Shovels up to my window, make it all out of the way. It's probably gonna make my brain. It's gonna be an advice like Griff. He said, what's that? You're dead.
December 1984, and Split Enz, New Zealand's most successful rock group, play their farewell show in Auckland. After 12 years and 9 albums, they've decided to call it a day.
You can be in people's faces, you can just stand there and strut, and even if it's awkward and weird, it's totally bold and it's totally unique.
As the songs drift across the audience, the past floats in the air. 1972 is barely a breath away.
So I went down to Malmesbury Villa quite a lot. That was a pretty atmospheric place, and the whole house was filled with a sense of something creative happening. You know, there was definitely an atmosphere in there. And a lot of what was going on I didn't understand or see, but when I went in there I definitely got filled with the spirit.
From the playing fields and music rooms of New Zealand schools, with the songs of the Beatles ringing in their ears, they descended on Auckland University. Tim Finn, Mike Chan and the enigmatic Phil Judd were soon part of a circle of aspiring artists and musicians. There was magic in the air.
Phil and I had already had an idea that we could work together. We'd done just a little bit of jamming and just got a feeling for it. It felt exciting, it felt like something was there. But he came and moved into the flat, and that was it. We started writing, and I still remember the first night when we wrote the song For You and the song Split Enz.
Looking back at it now, it was quite unique in a way, because it is very hard to make those situations happen, writing anything, but it seemed to happen quite spontaneously and naturally.
The future seemed to roll, you know, inside us. It just felt, it felt like something. It felt like a moment, you know, when everything just went still and we kind of looked at each other. And
I would anticipate, you know, every Sunday afternoon in the hot sun we would be rehearsing, learning these new songs, dreaming about taking them to the world.
We're outside the times, seen the break of day. My parents beat me 'cause I left, or something like that.
The New Faces television quest had started, and a couple of big hit singles came out of it. We saw that talent quest as a means so that we didn't have to go off and play in all the pubs, and to get through to the public en masse, we would go into this television quest, and we felt sure we were going to clean up. You know, we were going to win. We got off to a great start with the 129 song.
Hiding in the wings, forever, we'll take the stage.
In Te Awamutu, the Finn family huddled around the television set. An 8mm movie camera trained on the screen. On the carpet at their feet, Neil Finn, 14 years old and wide-eyed.
There was no doubt about Neil. He was most impressed. He thought that was just marvellous.
I did too. I nearly cried, I think, when they didn't win.
Well, for me it seemed so obvious. I was watching it and I was going, you know, this is, am I, you know, alone here? Is this the, I mean, to me it just seemed amazing, you know, it seemed like so much better than anything else on the show.
You've been my baby, you make my life worthwhile. You've been my sweetheart.
I just thought, it's mental. And I loved it. And that was the end of me doing Yes and Genesis covers, you know.
They began to play back ahead shows, rock concerts staged in theatres rather than in pubs. With Eddie Rayner and Rob Gillies in the band and Noel Crombie increasingly involved on stage and behind the scenes, the Enz, as their fans knew them, were in their element.
So we would say, right, but when people arrive, there's a curtain, it's a theatrical setting, we'd pull the curtain across and they would be confronted with something.
Please don't leave me
The
first time that the song that I started off playing spoons in was performed, Eddie's auntie did a tap dance routine. And that was sort of great, because there was like this whole thing, the ad hoc thing, you know, oh, what do we do here, you know, oh, Eddie's aunt, she can do a tap dance. And it went from there to realising you couldn't drag her off to Wellington or down every day when you suddenly got a gig, so what else can we do in that spot, you know, and then that's where the spoon sort of came into it.
Spellbound was a classic. I mean, just right out of the blue, Phil Judd turns up with a song that has the first Maori strum played by a whiteboard. You know, it's the classic.
Because I had no musical education as such, it all seemed open slather for me, and I had no hang-ups or bother about trying different ideas, different rhythms, whatever. I just did whatever happened at the time.
It was time to move on. Sydney was a start, even if the publicity was way off the mark, billing Split Enz as New Zealand's raunchiest rock and roll band.
We also expected that we might get a chance to be a professional band and play 5 nights a week and actually make a living from music.
The whole theatrical thing seemed to not be acceptable in that environment. They were after a rock performance, bang.
Yeah, that's when the nightmare side of it began. The romance of the writing was fantastic, but the reality of actually performing was a different thing altogether.
I think it was a little bit of a shock in that when we went on stage we got booed off, whereas it never happened in New Zealand before.
It bonded us very tightly, because back in Auckland we'd lived in separate houses and in a way had semi-separate lives outside being on stage or in a rehearsal room together. But in Australia, the 8 of us were in 2 hotel rooms.
We developed a cult following almost immediately, and people were obsessed about us, you know, the people that liked us, which were the minority, but there were people who would say to us, we've been waiting for this to happen, you know, we've been waiting for a band like this to come from this part of the world.
And I think I'll be all right now. Said I'll be normal someday. Said I'll be normal someday. Said I'll be normal someday. But now they're all come to teach me. And if you all look up, would you still look down on me? I'm just a country boy, can't you see that I'm still green?
Australian pubs were hardly the ideal venue for a band like Split Enz. Nevertheless, they soon had a hardcore of fans. Michael Gudinski, head of Mushroom Records, offered them a recording contract. Things began to move. Soon the first album, Mental Notes, was in the can. It was a triumph, confirming the uniqueness of the band and the Judd-Finn songwriting partnership.
So that was a big break for us at the time, to be associated with Mushroom Records, who at the time were just so strong and so cocky and kind of young, and, you know, there was a lot of energy there.
Roxy Music, Lou Reed, Leo Sayer, Frank Zappa, Santana. We played before all of them to many thousands of people.
Playing along there and looked across, and there's Roxy Music all standing on the end of the stage in a row. Virtually all the whole band watching us.
We'd made the record that we thought we should make, but I remember there was a lot of tension, a lot of nerves. We'd waited too long for it. It was like, I remember nights where Phil, you know, I'd be trying to sing Time for a Change, and Phil would be saying to me, you know, come on, try and remember how it felt when we wrote that song, and it was his song.
You were a blind man who was crying about all the virgins that are dying in your habitual dreams, you know. Seems you need more sleep, but like a parrot in a flaming tree, I to see. I'm beginning to wonder if it's time for change, but
extremely flawed record, but by the passing of time it becomes more and more strange and more unique as the years go by. You know, there'll never be another record like it, so it's kind of got its own truth, I suppose, and its own validity.
They were such a good band that every time you moved to another level, they could meet that level, so there was no way in which they were ever in. Some bands have to be persuaded to believe in themselves to go from a small stage to a big stage. Split Enz never had that problem.
Not long after Hopkins joined, the opportunity came up to travel to England. And the guys then decided they'd like a different guitarist. So Hopkins came round one day and said, bye. I said, what do you mean?
Soon saxophonist Rob Gillies was back in the band. And in his return, Split Enz were acknowledging the importance of the inner circle of family and friends.
Everybody got this thinking about everybody's middle names. You know, how you do, you say, what's your middle name? What's your middle name? Ha ha, you know. Mine's Emlyn, of course. You know, oh, it's Emlyn. Emlyn, that's unusual. Wow, you know. And so everybody, except Phil, of course, use their middle names.
It's the sort of thing you do when you're in a very select club of people. You change your name.
Every member of Split Enz could trace their musical passions back to England. When Phil Manzanera of Roxy Music expressed an interest in recording the band, a collective dream had come true. Full of hope, Split Enz landed in London in early 1976, unaware that a musical revolution was in the wind.
The punk thing really pretty much just overnight went bang, you know. But we used to see the Pistols down, because when we first got to London we were staying in King's Road, and we used to see them walking up and down the road because we were staying a block away from the sex shop. And it was like we used to sort of both check each other out across the street thinking, I wonder who they are, you know. And we found out.
I remember playing at the Marquee Club. I had this idea in my head that it was a big place and you know, it was all going to be with bells on, and we came round the corner and went into this small place, and it was pretty dank and dark.
Here was this dressing room with graffiti by everybody who everyone had held dear. Came on stage, played a blinding set. The next day the reviews, if I could sum them up in one line, said this was the dying gasp of art rock. I mean, this was devastating. This was, you know, there was no way in the world this was ever the end of anything. This was the beginning of something.
Manzanera was determined to capture on record the Split Enz that he'd heard in Australia. But there were problems. No deal to distribute the resulting record. And worse, no booking agent for the gigs the band so badly needed.
So we're in temporary accommodation in Chelsea, and some gigs were arranged with Gentle Giant down in Southampton. We went down and performed, and I think several other bands came along at Chrysalis's suggestion to have a look at Split Enz, and their collective message to Chrysalis was, I don't know what the hell you're going to do with this band, but you better sign them.
It took a little bit of persuading. It took a few months for the deal to come together. I think it was finally over a game of golf in Hawaii that we shook hands and the Split Enz deal was worked out, and you know, that was really the start of the serious attempts to break through in England.
Cowbell was the agency most closely affiliated with Chrysalis, so they were a natural target for Chrysalis to say, this is a new act of ours, we have great confidence in them, blah, blah, blah. So theoretically, Cowbell were then coming and sitting back in this rehearsal room for probably the hardest gig the band ever did was to 3 people in a rehearsal room in full gear.
We came out and did our complete show for 2 guys who sat up the back of this space. I was smoking cigarettes because every now and again you'd see this little red dot,
And then we finished, there was no applause, and they left the room.
We were unable to find an agent, and so that meant that we weren't able to play live, and so we'd go off to easy hire rehearsal rooms and rehearse all the time. But in actual fact, nothing happened there. It was total dead time. I've got tapes of those sessions where we just play hokey all the time. We'd lost a lot of spirit. Split Enz became, you know, just like this bland, almost two-dimensional thing in that summer of '76.
The new record was in fact Mental Notes Mark II. Eventually released in the Southern Hemisphere as Second Thoughts, it only differed from the Antipodean original on a couple of tracks. Many of the songs dated back to the Buck Ahead days, and the band felt the frustration of being frozen in time. Something had to give. Drummer Emlyn Crowther was fired and replaced by Englishman Malcolm Green, the first member from outside the circle.
There was no writing going on. Phil and I were just drifting apart, and it was kind of falling apart almost from within.
You know, we'd gone from this very quiet, almost inane, lethargic hot summer to a very cold, freezing, hyperactive winter. That, you know, that drew out the year. 1976 seemed like an eternity at the time. But we still finished it pretty much not knowing what was around the corner.
When Chrysalis Records decided to open offices in America, the zany band from Down Under seemed like the perfect attention getter. On their way to California, the Enz stopped off in New Zealand and enjoyed sellout shows. In America, Charlie's Angels and Fleetwood Mac were in the ascendance. As the tour set off the East Coast, scribing an arc through the Deep South, the pressure mounted.
Some towns really worked. San Francisco was magic. Standing ovation at the end of Another Great Divide. I can see them.
It was hell. Supporting very southern, typically southern bands, and we weren't appreciated at all, I don't think. And of course that's why I ended up scarpering, really. I just couldn't take it anymore. I didn't think places like that existed, but they do.
I just remember doing, I think it was Nightmare Stampede, which was about, I think about 14 minutes song, quite complex, a lot of stops and starts. The guitar was a very integral part, and I think Tim started it off, and then there's a point where Phil starts to come in and play, and it's Phil's turn, and he's standing there and he wasn't moving.
Phil exploded when accused, you know, of lying about his reasons for leaving the stage early, and so he lashed out and socked him on the jaw, and Eddie and I grabbed Phil to hold him back, and you know, in essence, a very sad sort of night.
It had been drifting along, but quite dangerously close to breaking up for a long time, but neither of us had articulated it, or, you know, we'd just been operating on denial. So when it finally was out in the open, there was a certain amount of grieving that had to go on.
In the wake of Phil's departure, Tim and Eddie set off for Baltimore to write. Mike Chan headed home, where he saw Tim's younger brother perform. To Mike, it seemed obvious. Neil had been around from the start, soaking up the Enz ethos. He should replace Phil. Back in London, the rest of the band agreed, and Neil was on his way. But for Mike, there were other problems.
I dabbled, unfortunately, with hallucinogenic drugs in the past, and I'd come out with an agoraphobic problem where I needed to have a home, and I never had one. It was always a hotel room. And so I said, I can see Tim in front of me. Tim, I'm going to have to leave the band. And Tim said, well, do it now. So I did.
I was driven to this really sleazy rehearsal studio in Camden on Chalk Farm called Easy Hire, and no one was there. I was there on my own with Nigel, who'd been hired the day before, and I didn't even know really who he was. He didn't know who I was. We just sort of had to chat to each other while all the others were down at the shop getting sandwiches.
First audition I went to, Tim was trying out My Mistake, Parrot Fashion Love, Charlie. They're the ones I remember. And these were all new songs for him. So it wasn't just me being new, it was also a new beginning for the guys too. Particularly Tim, as I say, because he'd really moved to the forefront of that stage.
The songs on Dysrhythmia were fresh and powerful. Though the influence of Phil Judd remained, Split Enz had demonstrated the ability to reinvent itself.
This time around it was all new songs, you know, so it was that freshness and that excitement was back, you know.
We got this chance to do Sight and Sound, which I think had an audience of, I don't know whether it was 6 or 10 million, it didn't say. After we got over 1 million, to us it was fairly unfathomable, but so it was a big thing.
Remember us? We do you, and our call to arms is clear. If music be the food of love, Split Enz be silverware.
From the beginning, their shows were a visual feast. The look of the Enz was like another melody woven through the songs. There was Raywin Turner's extraordinary stage light and Noel and Rob's highly innovative video clips. But above all, it was Noel's costumes that defined each phase of Split Enz.
It was the appropriate sort of mask to hide behind, I guess. And it did seem to suit everybody, yeah. None of us were hero, ego-bound type sort of people, really. We weren't in it for that.
Noel had a reputation even before I knew him as the one that would walk up and down Queen Street in big flowing suits of pink and white checks and a long beard and a cut-out silver bolt of lightning.
I kind of just saw the whole stage really as a picture in a way, and it was just good to have different focuses on the stage. You're not just watching the singer or whatever. At various points, everyone was sort of highlighted, and part of the whole costume thing was all wrapped up in that as well.
He came in with a big bulky suit carrier and unzipped it, and like Pandora's box, all these coloured costumes flew out. I had a brown one, Tim had a pink one, Phil had a red one. It was just, and we put them on and all fell about laughing.
I made these at the Manor while we were recording Frenzy, and they basically got used for fairly regularly over the next 3 or 4 years. Basically all essentially designed around an artist of some kind, this one being a Picasso-inspired number. Kandinsky, Miro, and of course Mondrian.
Seriously anyway, nobody takes me seriously anyway. Nobody takes me seriously anyway. Nobody takes me seriously. Nobody takes me seriously. Nobody takes me seriously. Nobody takes me seriously.
When Phil Judd saw the band live in England, he wrote to Tim suggesting he'd be happy to rejoin. The possibility of recapturing the early spirit was enticing. Soon Rob was fired, and Phil back in the band. But before another record could be made, he was gone again, this time for good.
We sort of plunged into this this void where we had no management, no record company, no money, etc., etc. It was at the beginning of '78, that tough year, which was sort of the making of the band, but was very tough.
And we booked ourselves into an 8-track studio for a few days, and we just let it all out. There was no hassles, everyone was just so relaxed, and just the chemistry just came together.
Yeah, the Rootin' Tootin' Lutin' tapes. There was a little studio in Luton. We went in, and we only spent a few days on them, but the band was just playing so well.
We were all tightly bunched in this little room. Noel was in the toilet, because there was only room for him. He was doing his percussion in the toilet. I could hardly move, I was playing like this. And we just banged down 28 tracks very, very quickly.
Those demos are now legendary, though Frenzy, the album it followed, failed to recapture the magic of Luton. Disappointed, Split Enz returned to New Zealand for the Nambassa Festival. A few days before the show, a suspicious fire in a rehearsal room destroyed their equipment. When the band hit the stage with borrowed gear, it was to deliver one of the classic live rock performances.
Completely brilliant show, that Nambassa show, because they had just built it up in themselves, up, after that whole extremely quiet year of 1978 where they created fantastic music, and they knew it. They had so much energy to burn that night.
Revitalised by the success of Nambassa, Split Enz embarked on the Give It a Whirl tour of New Zealand and Australia to support the Frenzy album.
Early 1979, they came back. Basically, England was gone all over. Kaput. They'd failed, essentially, as far as we could see. They'd lost the record company, etc. And it would have been about in May that year, 1979, that Tim said to me, I'm giving it to the end of the year, and then if it doesn't happen by then, I'll call it quits. That's exactly what he said to me.
The single, I See Red, had been recorded with an 18-year-old engineer, David Tickle. It roared up the Australian charts, eventually achieving gold status. That was enough to persuade Mushroom to bring Tickle this time to Australia to produce the next album. There was a good feeling about this one.
The band was playing the songs really well. We were deliberately stripping things back, and we were sick of the kind of excesses of time changes and colour changes and all of that.
Despite record company doubts about its potential, Neil's infectious I Got You was chosen as the first single off True Colours. It was an instant hit.
We became pretend blasé quite quickly. Oh, number one again this week, you know. Number one album, no one's singing. We just end up walking around like this, see each other in a hotel lobby, you know. Let's go and have lunch.
Love's got teeth and she bites your heart, leaving you for dead like a deadly shark, and she doesn't leave.
Ironically, to many, Split Enz were now an overnight sensation. The shows became pure pop mania, the records sold by the truckload. By September 1980, less than a year after departing the UK without a record deal, Split Enz returned to London, triumphant, to play before a packed Hammersmith Odeon.
I hope I never have to sign.
After the runaway success of True Colours, Tickle returned to record the next album. This time he was more difficult to work with, but that was a minor problem. The American record company had managed to come to terms with the band's wish to use 2 titles, Corroboree in Australia, Waiata everywhere else, but when it came to Noel's graphic, earthy cover, it was another story.
Brown is the colour of shit. You just can't use brown. And basically they blew that cover completely. What they did, with Waiata, they were looking for another True Colours, really. America realised they lost their opportunity. They hadn't got I Got You Away. They just wanted it again.
Split Enz thrived on change, and it felt like it was a bit of a formula back in the studio with Tickle.
Always a temptation when you've had a successful record to go back and do the same thing again, and it's never the same second time round.
It's hard to stay one step ahead of you. One step ahead of you. Time is running out, catching up with you.
In January 1981, with Waiata in the stores, Split Enz headlined the Sweetwaters Festival in New Zealand. It was to be Mal's last performance, as internal friction again took its toll. To find a replacement drummer for the Waiata World Tour, the band didn't have to look too far.
The finger was pointed and, "Noel, it's your turn." And I thought, oh, okay. And so I just leapt into it, and I felt I could do it, but it was pretty scary.
It was an extraordinary decision, but we had this thing with Noel where whatever you give Noel to do, he does. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm sure the other guys would say that too. He'll always come through.
I don't wanna dance no more, not since you walked out the door, left without a second glance. That's the end of my romance. In the nightclub, I'm still a point in a turning ground. History never repeats. History never repeats. Deep in the night, it's all so clear. I lie awake with great ideas, lurking about in no man's land. I think at last I understand. History never repeats. I tell myself before I go to sleep.
We had little rituals like paper airplane making in our hotel rooms, which we were passionate about. Completely un-rock and roll, but totally captivating.
This was a serious activity, and often in a hotel room after a concert would be full, not just with Split Enz, but leggers, hangers-on, record company people, girls, whoever, and they would all get drawn into this feverish activity to the point where there was no paper left, so phone books would be being used, anything. Magazines, anything, toilet paper, just making darts, frenzied activity. No drug taking, sex, nothing, just darts, sublimate. And then there were all these terms like checking in, which was when a dart would go straight out and then down into a lower floor.
Or into the reception.
Yeah.
We'd be checking in.
And then there's 1 for 1.
1 for 1 with towels.
Dressing room towel thing, before a show. You pick a partner, somebody who you might have had your eye on for a few days, fancy that. And you say, how about a bit of 1 for 1, Neil or Paul or whoever? And they go, rightio, come on then.
Okay.
And then one starts.
You go like this.
You yield to the buttock, like
this.
And then the person is allowed to wet the tip of the towel, do whatever they like to it, turn it into some sort of killing
weapon.
Machine, and then sting,
flail each other.
And then you have to yield after that, so it's 1 for 1.
To make the next album, Split Enz enlisted engineer Hugh Padgett. His relaxed style was just what they needed, and the result, Time and Tide, spoke for itself.
From the bottom of a big black lake, shovels up to my window, making sure I'm awake. She's probably gonna beat my brain, got me in a vice like grip. He said, I won't slip, you're dead.
The funkiest we ever got was Dirty Creature, and I still to this day don't know why we didn't mine that kind of vein,
Because we spent 3 days on that track and we finally got something that people who had never liked Split Enz suddenly said, oh, I love that song Dirty Creature, it sounds really funky. You know, you can actually dance to it and groove to it. It's very autobiographical, or sort of it's about the band as much as by the band, and it's also about us as people. And I was going through big traumas at the time with my life, and I was more or less having a nervous breakdown. Nothing to do with the band, it was more of a personal thing, but because of that I needed them all so much.
Tim had a sort of a personal triumph on that record because he came through a fairly dark period in his life and came out with some fantastic exorcisms in his lyrics and some very personal and intimate stuff.
I was born in Tiawan, 25th of June 1952. 10 pounds of boy, all away, all away.
Yeah, the feeling going into it was very much like, let's make a record for ourselves, let's not even think about America or hits or anything at all. It was a really indulgent record in some ways, and yet it has a kind of immediate, it's accessible, I mean you can get drawn into it, but I remember a review we got in England for it, which was really, really a bad review, and it accused us of being indulgent and of sounding like sort of 5 people locked in a southern hemisphere room somewhere making a record for themselves, and it's exactly what it was, you know.
With time and tide, the Enz knew they had produced a seamless, majestic work. A celebration of origins and personal strength, it used a nautical motif to convey a wide range of emotions and experience. Tim had accumulated a number of songs which didn't seem right for Split Enz. While the band took a much-needed break, he recorded a solo album, Escapade, which would yield the smash hit, Fraction Too Much Friction.
Tim was having a fling, it felt like Tim was having a fling, and I didn't really feel... I thought that he would go off and have his fling and then come back into his marriage with the band, you know.
That should have never been allowed to happen. I mean, it was a great success for Mushroom, and I loved the record and I enjoyed it, but had I still been in control of the band's management, I wouldn't let that happen. I mean, the band were firing, everything was moving ahead, they still had that American dream, and they still had to knock off America, and I think all effort should have been put into America at the time. They should have put every song they had into a Split Enz album.
Delayed by the success of Tim's solo record, the band finally returned to the studio in July 1983 to start a new album. There's a lot to be learned from Split Enz titles, and Conflicting Emotions is no exception.
Suddenly we had a different sort of balance, where Tim would normally perhaps have 2/3 of the songs. Suddenly Neil had all the songs.
This time the chemistry was different, with a lack of focus and solidity. In the search for solutions, Noel's days as drummer were over.
I should have told them all to piss off. Get serious, guys. But, you know, it just was the way it was, and, you know, I think, I mean, the album probably suffered for it, you know, because we just lost focus and we lost our strength in a way.
By the time the next tour rolled around, Noel was back on percussion, while new recruit Australian Paul Hester occupied the drum stool.
I felt like a sort of bastard son who'd returned. Like I felt like, you know, one of those boys had fathered me on a tour many years ago, and I'd come back and they gave me a job as a drummer just to keep me quiet. You know, it was like that. I mean, I can remember meeting all their girlfriends and wives And I really loved that. I thought they were all really gorgeous and sexy, and it was like, wow.
He injected something into the band when it was almost dead, really. I mean, it almost gone. He came in at a very late stage, and he put enthusiasm back into it, and he made us laugh, and he was fun.
We were rehearsing at Tim's place, and I just remember Tim being really not into it. And anyway, we weren't really playing all that well. Nothing felt great, and Tim seemed really distracted and not like he was not into it.
I thought it was all hunky-dory, and we were going to go and make another album and get a producer, and we did. We all talked about it, and there was all meetings, and eventually Tim sort of said, look, I don't want to do this, I want to go and do something else.
I think part of the reason we decided to stay together was because we were a little bit angry with Tim having lost the vibe for the band. And we were sort of stubborn. There was a certain stubbornness and perversity about, proving that it was still a mission and it was still a really important thing.
Tim's departure was inevitable. Now with a successful solo record and new creative opportunities on the horizon, it was time for a change. The rest of the band headed back to the studio, not knowing the resulting album, See You Around, would be the last.
When Neil decided that he wanted to leave, reality hit home to me, and we had a bit of a meeting, and it's like, it was, as big a shock for me as one of my parents dying, it had been half of my life almost. And it took me quite a while to get over it, actually.
The idea of being in Split Enz without Tim, just couldn't face it, really. I'd watched him start the band with Phil, and it just seemed too weird. The idea of having Split Enz under my songwriting sort of wing or whatever didn't seem right.
Tim returned for one last tour, labelled Ends with a Bang. It was a sellout as the fans flocked back to pay their final tribute.
A magnificent tour, I felt, and we were close. We did things like we'd all travel to the gig together in one car. We were just like physically and emotionally very close, I felt, and feeling the sadness to some extent, but celebratory as well. And
the last concert in Melbourne, Neil sort of went nuts, dived into the audience and all this, and did all these things he'd never done, and he was crying, and we were all backstage in between the encores, waiting to go on for the final encore, and it was like, it was like a really bizarre sort of movie.
You'd be sitting in your room at 2 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly somebody would be climbing in through your window and just sort of waving and walking out your front door, and very anarchic situation. Lots of drinking, lots of hooning around, and really, really enjoyable. It was good.
Sunlight, head up, you look wonderful, darling. Charlie, pale and deathly still, for heaven's sake, wake up, Charlie.
a lot of it was the romance of it, the romance of being in the perfect band with the perfect friends, and for all the ups and downs, there was just a tremendous kind of feeling about it all, always, It
was just one of those fluky things where you get a handful of people who are all on the same wavelength and inspired, and you can do things, It's all it takes.
All those wonderful songs just sort of rolling around in my head. I believe that everybody's got them spinning around in their heads, these great musical, fantastically exciting musical moments, and so why should we ever let them go? And none of us seem to be able to do that, and we'll go to our graves humming those songs.
What more can a poor boy do?
Split Enz wrote the soundtrack for a generation. It was a way of life for the musicians who sustained it, they produced unique records and inspired live shows. They're still close, and they still get together for the occasional live performance. And when they do, the spirit gathers as the spell is cast.
Thank you all very much.
Holding on until the last, call a tune and play it all. Dead on, there's a song that's just begun, strikes a chord in everyone. It's a decent thing to do.